I spent 82 years trying to make sure no one was disappointed in me. Not my mother, not my husband, not my neighbors, not even the woman at the post office who I only saw twice a year. If I sensed even a flicker of disapproval from anyone, Paulus, I would become whatever the moment seemed to need from me. And I did this so automatically for so long that by the time I finally stopped and asked myself who I actually was, I wasn't entirely sure I had an answer.
My name is Eleanor. I'm 85 years old. I was born in a small town in Ohio, the second of 4 children, to parents who loved us but were never particularly interested in who we were becoming as people. They were interested in how we behaved, how we appeared, whether we reflected well on the family. I learned very early that the way to be loved was to be easy, to be agreeable, to cause no friction. I carried that lesson into every single chapter of my life. I married at 23 a man named Robert, who was kind, steady, and deeply certain about everything. Robert always knew what he thought. I found that magnetic at first, this person who just knew things. He knew what he wanted for dinner. He knew where we should live. He knew how to raise our children. And because I didn't trust my own knowing, I leaned into his. I told myself that was partnership. I told myself that was love. And in some ways it was. Robert was not a bad man. He was a good man. But I disappeared inside that marriage in ways I didn't recognize until much later. We had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. I raised them the way I had been raised, with love, yes, but also with an eye toward how things looked. I pushed my eldest son toward engineering because it was stable, because people respected it. He wanted to be a musician, not in a dreaming, impractical way. He was genuinely gifted. I watched him slowly set that part of himself aside to become what I'd nudged him toward, and I told myself I'd done the right thing. I told myself I'd been practical. I told myself I'd been a good mother. It took me until he was in his 40s, sitting quietly at a family dinner, clearly somewhere else in his mind, for me to understand what I had done. I had handed him my own condition. I had taught him to abandon himself. That realization, that quiet, devastating dinner, was the beginning of something I didn't have words for yet. It was the beginning of seeing my life clearly for the first time. Robert passed away when I was 77. We had 54 years together, and in the months after he was gone, something strange happened. I became more myself than I had ever been. Not because he had oppressed me. I want to be careful here, because that's not the truth. He hadn't oppressed me, I had oppressed myself. And then I had stood in his shadow willingly because it felt safer than standing in my own light. After he died, I read more. I sat in silence more. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do, and yes to things I'd been quietly wanting for decades. I started painting terribly, joyfully in my kitchen. I let myself have opinions again, strong ones. I stopped performing happiness and started slowly finding small genuine pieces of it. And it was in that space, that strange, lonely, clarifying space of widowhood, that I began to grieve something I hadn't expected to grieve. Not Robert, not my youth, but all the moments I had been present in body and completely absent in spirit. All the times I sat at my own dinner table and managed the comfort of everyone around me while having no idea what I myself was feeling. all the conversations where I'd nodded when I wanted to push back, all the years I dressed for other people, decorated for other people, chose for other people. I had been a guest in my own life. The mistake wasn't any single decision. It wasn't marrying Robert or moving to his city instead of mine or letting my son's music fade. The mistake was the posture I brought to everything, this constant vigilance about external approval, this belief, somewhere very deep and very old, that I did not have the right to take up space simply as I was. I think many women of my generation were handed this belief. But I also know it wasn't only women, and it wasn't only my generation. I see it in people much younger than me. I see it in my grandchildren, this exhausting performance of a life rather than the living of one. The consequences of this kind of living are quiet. They don't announce themselves all at once. You don't wake up one morning and realize you've been unhappy. It's more like you wake up and realize you've been slightly numb, that there's a film over everything, that you've been going through motions with great efficiency and very little feeling. The consequence for my son was real, and it aches in me still. We've spoken about it gently as adults, and he's forgiven me in the way gracious people do, but I don't think I've fully forgiven myself. I think that's fair. I think living with that is part of the accounting. The consequence for my marriage was that Robert and I were, in some ways, strangers to each other even after 54 years. We loved each other, but we never fully met each other because I was never fully there to be met. I don't know if he noticed. I never asked. That too is part of the accounting. What I've learned, and I say this not as wisdom handed down from a great height, but as something I found the hard way in my late 70s, sitting in a quiet house, is that your life is the only thing that is truly yours. Not your reputation, not what people say at your funeral, not whether your children turned out according to plan. Your life, the interior of it, the texture of ordinary days and what you actually felt inside them. And you are allowed to want things. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to disappoint people, not carelessly, not selfishly, but the alternative, this lifelong self-erasure in service of approval, costs more than any disappointment ever would have. If you're under 60 and you're listening to this, I want to say something to you directly. You still have so much time. I know that sounds like something old people say, and it is. But I'm saying it because I lived the other side of it. And the time is real, and it will not come back. The decade you spend being who someone else needs you to be is a decade you cannot return to. Ask yourself honestly, how many of your choices in the last year were yours? How many were made out of fear of someone else's disappointment? Not duty. Duty is real and good, and I believe in it. But fear dressed up as duty, fear disguised as selflessness, that's the thing to look for. That's the quiet thief. Learn to be still enough to hear yourself. This sounds simple. It is not simple. Most of us spend enormous energy making sure we never hear ourselves clearly, because what we might hear frightens us. But that voice, your actual preferences, your actual values, your actual grief and delight, that voice is not your enemy. It's the only real guide you have. Make repairs while you can. If you have hurt someone through your own fear or unconsciousness and they are still alive and repair is possible, do it. Not for your own peace of mind, but because they deserve it. It won't undo anything, but there is something deeply human about looking at someone and saying, I see what happened and I am sorry. Don't wait until you are 82 to have those conversations. And be patient with yourself. I wasted years being ashamed of the wasted years. The shame helps nothing. It is simply more time gone. I am 85 now. I paint in my kitchen. I have a small garden. I call my grandchildren for no reason other than that I want to hear their voices. I say what I think at family dinners, and sometimes it makes people uncomfortable. And I've decided I can live with that. I've decided finally that I would rather be honestly present than comfortably invisible. There's something I want you to know. If you're sitting somewhere in the middle of your life wondering whether it's too late to become more yourself, it isn't. It is not too late. I promise you it is not too late. The shift I'm describing doesn't require a dramatic reinvention. It doesn't require you to leave everything behind or announce some transformation to the world. It only requires, and I know this is harder than it sounds, it only requires that you begin quietly to take yourself seriously, to let your own experience matter, to stop treating your own interior life as an inconvenience to be managed. I lived 82 years before I understood this clearly. I have had 3 years of living differently, and those 3 years, ordinary and small as they are, have felt more like a life than most of what came before. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it so that you don't have to wait as long as I did.